So if you're like me, you've been enjoying Guild Wars 2 for a while, learning about the story, your character, all these great things that you can do. But you also realize that there are some things that you can only learn about the game after you've spent quite a bit of time in it. And even at that, some things that only veteran players would really even tell you. Or wouldn't they? Well, guess what? That's what we're going to talk about today. These are the 4 things that veteran Guild Wars 2 players won't necessarily tell you. First and foremost, right out of the gate, probably not even that surprising, core professions really aren't as strong as elite specializations. Now, as a disclaimer, this isn't meant to say that core professions can't compete with elite specializations in certain situations. Of course, that isn't what I'm meaning. But generally speaking, elite specializations outpace, outvalue, and outweigh just about everything that a core profession can do. Take, for example, the core support guardian. Has great healing, has great buff up time, can do those things very, very well. Now compare it to its elite specialization, the quick heal brand, that not only brings quickness, which is one of the most important squad-based, PvE-based buffs that you can have, on top of that healing, on top of adding some really good just overall DPS to the boss. It kind of makes the core support guardian a little bit lackluster. Now, that's not meant to say that in other situations the core support guardian isn't great. Look at it in PvP. The core support guardian is still one of the best supports that you can play in that game mode. Whereas the quick heal firebrand, or even just the firebrand in general in PvP, tends to be pretty lackluster and falls off very quickly. Certain situations, these professions can do very well. As ArenaNet has created these new elite specializations and brought them in with these new expansions, they've kind of done a disservice to the core professions, because these new elite specializations usually can do 1, 2, 3, 4 different things very well, whereas core professions tend to really only do 1, maybe 2. And again, I will say this as a disclaimer, this does not mean that groups will not invite you or you will not be included if all you play is core professions or if that's all you have access to. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that elite specializations tend to outweigh the value of core professions because of what they can do and how those professions have been built out. Real quick though, tell me what your favorite core profession is. Tell me in the comment section down below. Why do you play it? Now let's go ahead and glance over at Endgame Content. Endgame Content isn't valued the same across the board. That doesn't mean that there isn't a strong community within those different endgame groups. No, that's not what I'm saying. You'll find plenty of PvPers, plenty of World v Worlders, raid groups, strike groups, fractals. I mean, you'll find these different groups where people play. I'm talking about the developmental stance. ArenaNet doesn't really favor all of these game modes the same. Historically, Guild Wars 2 development has focused a lot on the story, and which is great. It's great for most players and everyone to understand it. And they've also focused on PvE instance content, so like strikes, which is the apparent future of Guild Wars 2. That's pretty cool. They focused on raids. Awesome, love it. PvP hasn't been updated since launch. Now I say that that's a bit of an exaggeration, kinda, but it doesn't receive the same kind of attention as the other game modes. So if you're coming into Guild Wars 2 and you're really interested in playing the PvP, that's one of my favorite game modes, it doesn't receive the same attention that it does if you were coming in as a PvE player looking to do those instance content. I mean, heck, World v World, which is arguably one of the most unique game modes across any MMO, is only now just starting to see some type of update. And even at that, the update's been going on for like a year. It rolls out very slow. And we know that from ArenaNet because they are not a massive developer. They don't have this massive cash draw coming in comparison to say like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy, where we have these subscription-based financial influx. They are essentially just relying on people buying the game and then purchasing things off of the in-game gem shop. But I can give them a little bit of credit there that they don't have the same weight when it comes to development. However, veteran players won't necessarily tell you that World v World, PvP, good God, fractals don't really get updated that often, if at all. Something that I've noticed as I've made more and more guides on Guild Wars 2, beginner guides on Guild Wars 2, is a lot of this talk of what is horizontal progression. I get a lot of people who ask, What does that mean to me as a new player? Horizontal progression essentially is you earn a piece of gear, achievement, context, some type of value to your account that does not exponentially increase your character's power. Meaning that a piece of gear that you gain right now that has the certain stat values will be just as effective 3 expansions down the line. If we get 3, we'll see what happens. And that pretty much carries over with everything else that Guild Wars 2 has to offer. If you earn a mount, that mount is good forever. It's attached to your account. Every one of your characters has access to it. If you get a certain legendary, you work and earn a certain legendary weapon, it is accessible to every character on your account that can use that legendary. Pretty cool. What veteran Guild Wars 2 players won't necessarily tell you right out the gate as a new player is that horizontal progression isn't for everyone. If you're coming from a World of Warcraft background where you are constantly looking at the next gear increase, you're constantly working and striving to get that slight little upgrade to improve your overall DPS, your overall healing, or your tanking capabilities, and a lot of players don't necessarily like just having to earn once, keep forever. To them, they earn this piece of gear, and then essentially they just hit a ceiling. There's no further higher that they can go, despite the amount of effort, despite the type of content that they play. I mean, think about it this way. You go ahead and work on this really tough boss with your guild for weeks on end, striving, getting a little bit closer, and after all that work and effort, all you get is an achievement and a title. And that's it. To some players, that's really disappointing. But on the flip side of that, if you're in a situation where I am, where I can't play video games all the time, and the efforts that I put in, I want that effort to be able to continue on and that value not lost over time. I want the work that I'm putting in right now to be able to carry over for the rest of my gaming career. Cool. Awesome. I like that because I don't have a whole lot of time. But some players might have a lot of time. And essentially, Guild Wars 2 ends up being a collectible game. You go and collect all the different things in the game that you can, achievements, mounts, pieces of gear, and yeah, you did it, you collected them all. Some players might find that off-putting. Hey weary traveler, you've been watching this video for a while. Sit by the fire and hit the like and subscribe button. I don't know, that was trying to do something with like Dark Souls. Anyway, moving on. On the topic of Endgame and on the topic of horizontal progression, something that veteran Guild Wars 2 players don't really tell new players is that Endgame and earning those pieces of collectible high-end gear is very repetitive. Like really repetitive. I know for the most part, MMOs have some type of repetitive content. You're playing the same dungeon, the same boss, the same instance. You're doing something over and over again. I get that happens across the board. But in the sense of the horizontal progression to earn these pieces of gear, to earn these certain collectibles that you are after, you have to do the same instances over and over and over again. For example, Ascended gear, which is some of the best, highest stat quality gear that you can get within the game. You can usually achieve these a number of different ways, but the most popular tends to be strikes, raids, or PvP. Now, strikes are single instance bosses, while raids are multiple boss instances. Instance bosses? You guys get what I mean. And to earn enough materials to purchase the ascended pieces of gear for example, a strike, you have to kill essentially the same group of bosses over and over and over again on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to earn the materials to get this piece of gear. That gets old, in my opinion, very fast. Now, PvP, I will say, stands out a little bit just because in PvP you're against other players, and that can be different every single match. What type of player you play against, the flow of the match, there's a lot of different variables that can make it a little bit more interesting and more intriguing in my opinion. But essentially you're still doing the same thing. You're going and killing players. You just gotta kill a lot of players to earn this gear. You're doing it for the cause. And for that example, World v World is a little bit more diverse in that sense because there's a number of different situations. It tends to be a little bit more engaging, in my opinion, and I know that there's some players who sympathize with that. And again, that's really what it comes down to, is a lot of endgame content and a lot of what you are going to be working on this horizontal progression for requires you to do a lot of the same instances and the same things over and over again. Now, I use this in the case of explaining gear. If you're looking at, like, say, achievements or mounts or certain pieces of collectible, we'll say fashion in this sense. Yes, there's different ways that you can entertain yourself with that. But if you're looking at pure group-based, instance-based, even solo-based endgame content, you're going to be doing the same thing a lot and often. And I will state again, I do understand most MMOs have this type of repetitive feature across all of their endgame content. But due to Guild Wars 2's slower content release, it feels like this is something that you're going to have to do for months on end. And after a while, some players might not really like that. And that's okay. Now, hopefully, ArenaNet's new content schedule and what they plan to do with the game could offer some new life to this. New expansions, new strikes, sweet mercy, a new PvP match. Something, a new map. If you're still new to the game and you're still trying to understand your character, this video right here will show you everything you need to know to understand what your character can do, what their buffs are, what their debuffs are, and how to gear efficiently. Stay caffeinated, folks.